Oh, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 17th episode of Retuning Your Firm. It's actually the 32nd week that we've run this show, so I'm really pleased that there's a lot of people who are still with us, including, of course, Francesca, who's one of our guests today. And we're also very lucky that Jeremy is joining us back today. For those who've been following his story, I think he's going to tell us a bit about his holiday as well. That's why he hasn't been with us for a couple of weeks. And we have two amazing new guests. But first of all, I'd like to say I hope you had time and enjoyed yourself in the informal networking in the lounge. It's something that I find people are increasingly interested in. What we're now finding is very interesting is that people are now starting to use it for internal meetings. It's becoming the staff canteen. There's a really interesting angle there, I think, because that social side is often so missing in firms these days, and we'll talk a bit more about that, I'm sure. So what are today's themes? Now, as you probably know, I kind of let the machine do the work. So I put the three words in, and then I kind of invite the design guru to come up with some images. So whether we really think that the boards are all going to be skating around, I don't know. But when I put the word boards in, back came the skateboard. So there you go. So that's a new image for the boards. Property was fairly easy. D&I, it came up with an easel with a bunch of colors on. Now, that's a really interesting analogy because, of course, it brings everything together into one, because otherwise it doesn't work. But it definitely also stresses the diversity. So I don't know if that's the machine doing something that's already known elsewhere. But if not, we have a new image. There you go. I'm sure that Fiona will be able to pass thoughts on that. So those are our three themes for today. Let's think, who have we got on? Well, first of all, very welcome to Alistair Elliott, who's the senior partner and group chairman of Knight Frank, which of many of you know is a very major player in the world of property. So delighted to have you with us. Secondly, we have Fiona Hathorn, who is the co-founder and the CEO of a very important group called Women on Boards, which have been very, very important in moving to a situation where that balance is no longer imbalance. I think that's probably an elegant way of putting it. Subsequently, Francesca Lagerberg, who, as we all know, is global leader of network capabilities. I call it her ray of sunshine. It's actually raining outside, so maybe that will affect us today. But let's hopefully not. We can always have sunshine here. And Jeremy Beard, who is the managing partner of Hayes McIntyre, and is always happy to see things as they are, say things as they are, and if they haven't tried it, okay, well let's give that one a go. And in fact, the idea of a canteen is one that he and his partners are actually starting to work on next week. So that's going to be quite interesting. So hopefully we'll get some feedback on that one. And of course, yours truly, the managing partner, Forum, and founder and chief exec. We've been around for rather more years than I care to admit. I think 32 years ago, I started doing what I'm doing. So that kind of makes me a bit of an ancient, but never mind. I'm enjoying myself, and that's the main thing. So let's run through some ideas. Those of you who are new to the show won't possibly have seen this. Those who have, I think it's still very much worth repeating. So first of all, how are you actually going to be retuning your firm? How are you going to be taking advantage of this second lockdown so that when you emerge onto the track, you're not going to get overtaken by somebody? Well, first of all, think big. As Lewis Carroll memorably said, you've got to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. That's a really good metrics to work with. But equally, think small. Think about the angles that will resonate with your key audiences. Everybody's being bombarded by white papers and stuff, but how are you going to get through? What are you doing that's actually how can you keep an audience in that way? And remember that relationships are not about address books. That's an element of it, CRM systems, if you like. Actually, it's about reciprocity. It's about favors. It's about actually going the extra mile, creating the win-win with somebody. That's what builds the relationships. And I think we all know that in terms of our clients, but are we doing the same with our people at times? I'm not sure. And I know that Fiona and I were chatting about how possibly certain things weren't managed the way she would have expected in the past in her world. So do a campaign, not a one-off. We're 32 weeks in now, something that started, okay, let's try something 32 weeks on. So we have an audience. I mean, that's the best way to describe the people who are watching today. We know many of you come back week on week, so that's just lovely. You've got to drop convention. You've got to go for new ideas. You've got to go for new services. There's no point in just automatically assuming that what worked then is going to work now. It doesn't. Are we in a new normal or in the new future? We can have a conversation around that. But the point is that convention sometimes gets in the way. And speed is of the essence. Everybody has done 3 years of development in about 3 weeks. Are you now in the sort of, oh my God, I don't want any more change scenario? Or are you now more, okay, well, we've got to change, we've got to change. And I think certain firms will go in different directions on that one. But either way, the key to it, I always think, is you've got to focus on assumptions. As an accountant, I am one. You change your assumptions, your accounting policies, let's call them what they really are, and you change the profit. Very simple. And it's the same with anything you do. You've got all the assumptions that underlie what you're doing, and you've got to articulate them, because only once you've articulated can you test them. And when you launch anything, what you're effectively doing is market testing those assumptions. It's called lean start. And if you prove invalid, and they will, because experimentation is usually fails, as most scientists will tell you, it also depersonalizes it if you use the words like experiment and validity, then you've got to amend them and you've got to pivot in a new direction. The key word there is often pivot. That's the one that lean start jump on. Be entrepreneurial, keep listening and innovating. And the most important word in that sentence is listening. If you're not listening to people, how are you sure that you're in alignment with their needs from the client side or in terms of your people? Do they want to work at home? Do they want to be back in the office, et cetera, et cetera? You've got to keep listening. That's fundamental. And I'd like to thank Alina Kudsek of Globsec Bratislava, who spoke at the Global Think Tank Town Hall back in April. And it's just really stood the test of time, those 7 strategies. So I commend them to you. Okay, let's move on to polls. Now, as you probably know, we do a poll every week. And this is the feedback from UK government. I will say one day I got the results to them a day late and they asked me where they were. That to me is a definition of thought leadership. So please contribute. And in fact, they go a bit further than just the government. The House of Lords report came out recently on one on the UK-EU relationship on professional business services. That came out about a month ago. And I think I'm correct in saying that with the only poll that they included, as opposed to government stats, was our poll, which we ran for them in a submission with the UK Trade Policy Observatory and City Ready, which is Birmingham Uni. So we try and make sure these polls aren't just something that is used for today, but actually gets a broader audience. So what did we talk about last week? What was the poll? Well, we were looking at marketing. That was the area that people felt was quite important. They kind of said, well, profitability is okay, client service is okay, but actually, new work is a bit harder in the current climate. It's a bit hard to persuade partners to pick the phone up and cold call people. I know there's a lot more to marketing than that. But so we thought, well, okay, what's the sort of, to what extent, how sort of vulnerable are firms, if you like? And I mean, in my mind, if over 20% of your new workflow typically comes from new clients, you're fairly vulnerable if marketing is proving a problem. If it's lower numbers, up to 5% or something like that, and you're probably going to feel, oh, it's fine. So that was more around where is the sector in terms of the people on the call today? Where are you at there? This one's a bit busier, but I'll talk you through it. This was really looking at the extent to which people working from home on a long-term basis, which I think most people now recognize is going to be a reality, some sort of hybrid world, if you like. And if you're dealing with non-UK clients, obviously Brexit also emerges as an issue. To what extent will that impact your ability to win work from new clients? And you can see there are 4 colors. You've got existing clients in the UK and the non-UK. You've got new clients in the UK and new clients in the non-UK. And to be honest, nobody's really focusing on extreme impact. A few people say there's no impact. Modest impact is the one that's there. So this is not basically people saying this is a real problem, but this is something that certainly needs a lot of management time and attention, I think. What's that doing to your marketing budgets? Well, this is quite fun because if you compare the current year, which is the red one, against the year before, in other words, 2020 on 2019, then you have a 35% of firms which reduced by more than 20%. There was a knee jerk. We've got to furlough the marketing people. We've got to cut back on marketing expenditure. That was April. Now we're looking at what's happening in the blue one, which is next year compared with this year, and it's all the blue is on the right side of the chart. And you can actually see that because we asked the next question was, where are the marketing people? Where are they putting their effort? And again, we always see this gap between the things that marketing people are seen as their core staples, if you like, which is pitch support and marcoms and maybe CRM systems merging into data analysis and stuff like that. And then you've got the areas where there are gaps. So are they involved in the pricing strategies? There's a gap there. Are they involved? Are they change agents? Are they sitting down with the managing partner and kind of coming up with alternative scenarios? Again, a gap. The biggest gaps are in the middle, are all about, are you using your marketing people to make direct approaches to targets? Are you using them to help develop new services? And finally, over to the right, are they sourcing new clients, which is the bigger gap of all? Now, some people would argue that the role of marketing is about profile and brands and relationships, and it's the sole role of the partners to go out and win work. We had a conversation about that last week, and one of the people on the call was saying, yes, our job is not to do anything in the business development space which involves direct action with clients, whereas I think most of the accountancy firms would say that actually isn't really a very good strategy. And I suspect the property people would definitely expect people to be out on the road and talking to clients all the time. So that's kind of where the gap is. What's that doing for headcount? And this is really the final one. So about the same. So what you're actually seeing here is that there's been a sort of a blip. So there was back in about 9 months ago now, I suppose, March time, all of a sudden reduce the marketing expenditure, sack the marketing people, furlough them, etc. And now actually we're now looking at pretty much going back to the same size of marketing teams in 2021 as we had prior to the pandemic. So that's been an interesting education, maybe. I'm sorry for a few marketing people, but they're now all of a sudden seen as quite important to help the frontline advisors win work, which possibly they weren't being seen in that light before. Who knows? We'll see. So let's do today's poll. I wanted to look at the impact of the pandemic. We're in the second lockdown. Certainly, I know some people on the call are in different countries, so it may vary, but certainly in the UK, we're in different lockdown. And we did a number of questions back in April, May about what was the impact of the pandemic on firms at that stage. And I can't give you the comparatives yet. I'll have to do that when you see the final one in a few days' time. But I thought it'd be really interesting just to ask some of those questions again and see what people now think. And has the 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is, changed the way that people view the impact of the pandemic on their firm? So changes to the way that firms, advisors and clients actually operate, how your firm has responded, to what extent your business model has been interrupted, has the appetite for technological appetite changed? What's likely to be the legacy impact on the business? What's the current horizon for business planning? To what extent are new tech seen as critical to future competitiveness? And lastly, and this is more for Fiona for today, who's responsible for inclusiveness at your firm, and what sort of sanctions are there for conduct by senior management partners that is not inclusive? So we'll see what those two come up with and see if that ties in with women on boards. Obviously much more in-depth research than we can do on the call today, but it's fun to just do that. Well, 3% if you think the old ways resume. That's kind of a simple message, isn't it? So we are definitely, and there's a slight, the mix between yes to a material extent and yes to some extent is slightly more in favour of yes to some extent, but there's about 40% think that there's going to be and remember, this is a permanent alteration in the way that firms, advisors and clients operate. That's not something that happens very frequently in our lives, I suspect. So the fact that 40% of you think that it's likely to be to a material extent, I think is quite important. Right, what about labels? No real hibernators. That's possibly not surprising. That's where you're just furloughing. I think that's probably true in certain industries, maybe entertainment and stuff like that. A lot of thrivers, 50%, I would say, nearly continuing operations to meet high demand for services. And then smaller numbers around survivors and pivoters. Now, that is not typical, by the way. I know when Be the Business, because it's their approach, when they did this some time ago, they kind of came up with a very different mix. So I think what it basically says is that professional services is actually very good at adapting to new situations. It's very agile, and that probably is why we're one of the most successful sectors in the country, if not the most successful. So that's quite encouraging, I think, for a number of reasons. In terms of how disruption has the crisis been, well, there's a few 10% extremely disruptive. Nobody is in 0 or 1, and then it's kind of, but most people it's 2 to 3. So it's kind of, as I said before, it's profitability is okay. And I think when I look back at April, I'll probably find that those numbers have dropped a bit compared with April. Again, I don't have the information with me, but that will be shared in due course. Which bit has been impacted the most? Again, this reinforces the poll I think we just did from last week, the pursuit of new clients. That's the one area which has been mostly impacted in terms of the business model, the practice operations. But it's quite a nice spread looking at it. Client service hardly affected at all, but again, that's what I'm thinking. Revenue model, not a lot. So it's really engagement with existing clients, business operations, but the most important one is pursuit of new clients. I think that's fairly consistent with other polls that we've done. In terms of what about the attitude, the appetite for technological change. As we all know, you can impose technology on anybody, but unless they actually decide to use it, it's tough. And that's particularly the case with partners. But the appetite has somewhat increased. And in fact, if you put the increase, it's basically 3% it's reduced, 11% the same, and all the rest is increased. So that's a big change, I think. People are much more willing. And I know any number of managing partners said to me, oh, great, I can now roll out the things I always wanted to do because all the naysayers have retreated into their caves. So I've got free rein to get on with it. I mean, it's not quite that simple, I know, but this again kind of reinforces that, because if there is an appetite for change, then people are then more willing to actually do things in a different way. What about the impact, the legacy impact of the pandemic? To what extent will that impact the business? And it's a 3, but there's 15% of you saying it's extremely significant, and 28% it's a 4. So unlike the one we looked at before, which was to do with the shorter term impact around a number of things, when it comes to the legacy impact, this is moving into significant, if not extremely significant. And I think, again, I'll have to compare that with April, but I think that's kind of a message to leadership that, same as usual isn't going to work. Planning has definitely shifted. I remember back in April, everybody was looking at up to 3 months. That was kind of the median. Now we're looking beyond 12. So things are settled. That's a more standard pattern as you'd expect. So that's probably quite helpful to know. In terms of the new technologies being critical, yes, but not, obviously nobody less, that's a given, 0 there, but actually significantly more, about a third. But the big one is somewhat more than before the pandemic. So it's not as if we're all going to suddenly become tech companies and compete with Amazon or something. That's not the way we are as professional services. But yes, it will impact future competitiveness. Okay, now we're moving into a space which is specifically for Fiona. I won't pass any judgment on this, other than to say that in terms of who currently has primary responsibility for inclusiveness, the board is the one that comes through top, and the CEO second, and then the others are all kind of not really on the thing. But this one perhaps will going in the other direction, which is to what extent are sanctions given for conduct by senior management or partners that is not inclusive? 44% sometimes, and 8% never. I pity the people who work in the 50% of firms to which that applies, and the other 50% are either normally and consistently is only 22%. Now that's not, I don't think those are particularly wonderful stats from the D&I agenda if you're trying to move things forward in that world. But anyway, I'll give Fiona time to think about that, and we're now going to stop sharing, and I'm going to invite Alistair, who, as I mentioned, is the senior partner and group chairman of Knight Frank, to come and talk to us a little bit about what are some of the trends in property. Over to you, sir.
Richard, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. It's a great pleasure to join this session. Asking an agent to summarise the property market in 5 minutes is a major challenge for me, but I'm going to do my very best. Richard has given guidance not to cover a lot of subjects, but the real estate sector is a broad one. But anyway, 5 minutes I will do. And hopefully will provoke some questions and thoughts. I've been at Knight Frank since 1983, so perhaps make even Richard feel young. Just completed my 37th year in the industry. 20 plus years of that was involved in the office sector, office agency and development. Whilst the firm has a strong residential brand, I think it's important for context that you understand and know that 50% of our UK income is commercial, transactions and advisory, and our overseas businesses are pretty much exclusively in the commercial arenas. Within the commercial arenas, office, development, agency and advisory account for a large proportion of our workload. And in that regard, to acknowledge that there was already a significant change in place around dynamic working, working from home, co-sharing. You will have seen much publicity about the WeWork model, which perhaps controversially was Regus Mark II, which is just an adaptation 20 years later. And look what happens when the markets retract, people move most quickly from flexible office environments. There's no surprise to me in that. But what was the key point to my mind is that I think dynamic working as a culture is here to stay. We at Knight Frank actually did a pilot study, ironically, last winter, so we're better prepared for what was ahead, where we invited people to take responsibility for where they could best execute their work. It might have been at home, it might have been in the office, it might have been at a client's office, it could have been on the move, it could be a hotel room, it could be anywhere. And that model taught us a lot, firstly, to go into lockdown, and secondly, for the long term of the dynamic working and flexible working environment, which the COVID experience has unquestionably accelerated for all office-based businesses. However, our engagement with a whole range of landlord and occupier clients suggests that a very mixed outturn is expected from the COVID experience. And let's be honest, it's going to be 12 or 18 months before we know really what the structural shift is going to be in that market. Will offices become obsolete? Will they be used differently? Will they be used more intensively? The one encouraging factor with a vested interest was that most markets went into the COVID environment without an oversupply. So offices in London were full, offices in New York were full, offices in Hong Kong, etc., were full. It has led us to, in our engagement with our clients, to work out, of course, what the future is going to look like. And I have learned a lot, or been reminded of a lot, around the importance of a workplace. Perhaps it won't be called an office. The importance of a workplace for culture, for engagement with people, for collaboration, early careers. We did our graduate scheme in the summer. We did our intern and apprentice schemes in the summer still, some virtually, some physically, but we continued that commitment. You can't train, learn and develop young people without a workplace environment. Perhaps controversially, one of the outputs of the COVID experience might be people want more space. We've gone through 30 years of giving people less space per head, sharing everything, co-working, sitting, one desk. You don't have a desk. You share a day. You come in one day, you use one desk. That's all on its head at the moment. We have got desks for everybody again, and there is a suggestion that more space might be needed. People want well-being as a greater focus within the office environment. Embracing the ESG agenda, which I know is going to come on to later. But one thing I will say, having lived through several cycles of the property industry, normally all issues relating to philanthropy and the environment go in the bin. This year, they have just risen up the agenda. So ESG was not only gathering momentum, but as far as I can see, within a workplace and real estate environment, it's just gone up a gear because of the COVID experience. So well-being, diversity are key issues on our agenda, and real estate has not got a great profile when it comes to diversity, and I'm happy to pick that up later. So in summary, the office workplace, I believe, will have a strong value, strong position to play unquestionably, but it will change its purpose, and that will adapt. How that looks in demand, we won't know for another 12 or 18 months. Very quickly in my final minute, or is it minus a minute, but just to let you know, the residential market is really very busy. That's taken us by surprise. People definitely want more space. They want room in their buildings for studying. There's no surprises there, but it has led to an extraordinarily busy period across the field for residential. Equally, the retail market is restructuring even more quickly than it was restructuring before, and logistics or distribution, as you will have seen, are gaining even greater momentum. Hospitality and leisure is in a ghastly place, and who knows, I reckon actually hotels will come back quite quickly, but only when people can travel and business is being done in any new normal way. I think for the food and beverage sector, that's a whole different kettle of fish. The alternatives around the private rented sector, student property, data centres, healthcare, retirement are all actually incredibly busy, suggesting to me that real estate has got many moving parts and actually has never been more dynamic. But unquestionably, office function will change, but we believe will ultimately retain their value. Richard, thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. That was a really helpful summary. I appreciate you were probably rushing through faster than you normally would, but I think it was really nice and succinct, so really appreciate that. Fiona, we've got a couple of questions in the poll. Only 22% would definitely deal with bad behaviours. Tell us a bit more about Women on Boards and some of the thoughts that you have in terms of where you can add value to the conversation around COVID and broader.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that Alistair mentioned was culture, and culture and the purpose can be set by the board. So the boardroom is really important for every organisation across the UK. With regard to the diversity and inclusion agenda, yes, I see that the board is responsible and the chief exec's responsible. But bear in mind, I work with loads of companies, and it doesn't mean to say that they know what they're doing. If you get involved in anything that's really important, and Alistair also mentioned about well-being, employees going up the agenda in this crisis when historically they haven't, this is a change program. If you want to be inclusive and be successful in managing a diverse team, you need to take it seriously as a long-term change program. Most organizations that I come across are not. They're faffing around with a few initiatives and hoping for the best. And we know from the research and we know from the data that we haven't shifted the needle. Forget the fact that we've got 30% of women on FTSE 100 or FTSE 250 boards. My comment to that is whipty flipping D, because outside the FTSE 350, we're at 12% and we have not moved. And then you go to the executive side, which is where it's really important. We're very, very slow. So what do I think's going wrong? Well, the first thing is there's a deep lack of understanding within senior management teams with regard to what inclusion actually means. Now, the chief exec may say, I get it, I have daughters, don't you know? But the reality is many of them are not experts. They're experts in managing their business. And this is different. Inclusion is extremely difficult for all of us. It's difficult for me as well. A lot of companies have brought in unconscious bias training programs, and the research is out there. You may still be in the middle of yours. They don't work. They're a mere blip in the change journey. They're not going to actually change anything. What really needs to happen is conscious inclusion, training people to be inclusive, good listeners, chair meetings very well. They speak for less than 10% of the time. Being inclusive and making sure that you do successfully have disagreement, but you're listening to different ideas, left field ideas, is extremely hard. There's an enormous amount of poor communication across the businesses that I see with regard to why diverse teams perform better. You may have read the Kool-Aid and McKinsey and all that sort of stuff. That doesn't mean to say your leadership team underneath really understand. Lots of companies, and particularly the ones that are male dominated, which is most of them, but let's take financial services or property, as Alistair honestly admitted earlier, they don't understand what's going on. They're seeing these initiatives going on and they're frustrated. So a lot of work has to go in with regard to the permafrost in terms of making them inclusive. That is actually about leadership training. And then on top of that, you've got lovely, excited, I would say overly excited enthusiasts. They're not experts. So it could be the powerful woman who doesn't necessarily know because she's a fantastic, unique survey of one. You've got your LGBT leads, you've got your Black minorities, you've got your BAME, and we've all set up networks, and we're all chatting away. And then we've decided to let them lead the program. Well, that's assuming they know what they're doing. And they may not. Some of them are excellent, by the way. And it's not to say you shouldn't have a minority network. Minorities need somewhere to go to find support and talk. But most of these organizations are not giving these networks a mission and outcome or a budget. Do you normally manage your business like that? And those networks are going left field, which is why I've said NEDs need to get involved. And afterwards, I'll share with Richard the 5 questions I think non-execs should ask. Now, bear in mind, the non-execs don't necessarily know what they're doing either. This is not their area of expertise, but you often get diversity and inclusion experts, and some of them really are experts within your business, but they're often too junior to influence the top. There are exceptions in that, and that's why NEDs need to get involved. There's a massive amount of research here of what doesn't work. Do you know what doesn't work? King's College have done a huge amount of research on this, and I'm just going to give you 5 things that apparently don't work. You don't shift the dial via employee minority-led networks. Yes, they are important. You don't shift the dial by trying to fix the minorities, by giving them a little bit of leadership training. It's not them that are the problem, it's the inclusiveness around them. Mentoring programs, very popular at the moment. We know mentoring is important. I bet if you asked Alistair if he's had a mentor, he's had a really high quality mentor, and he's probably had 20 or 30 mentors. People have supported him over his career. Cross mentoring, one person with one other person, hoping that's going to work. Well, good luck with that project, because it's very clear it doesn't work. Not saying it's not nice. Unconscious bias, I've mentioned already. And then what about the idea of making sure there's a woman or a diverse person on an interview panel? One doesn't work. There's a reason we've got 30% on boards. One voice doesn't necessarily work. This is hard. This is your brand. This is your business. Treat it like those marketing budget, which as Richard's already said, they all fly around anyway. Are you treating that seriously? If you're serious about this, diverse teams perform better. However, they are much, much harder to manage. Recruiting a bit of diversity usually makes you go backwards. This is long-term and it's tough. And I'll just read out the 5 questions and then I'll stop, because I know I'm under time pressure. What should the non-execs be asking? How is our D&I performance helping or hindering our strategic objectives? Let's get it back to the top. Is our board getting regular updates? I know we've identified one person to be responsible for D&I, but are they getting the right information? Are they looking at the right metrics? Most aren't. That comes on to gender pay gap reporting and pay gap ethnicity reporting. Do you even have the data? The amount of inaccurate reporting of the most simple gender pay gap is utterly laughable, because people are getting the data wrong. You can't do anything without the right data. So I would bring experts in to do that, and not just rely on your HR department reading the government's initiative and having a go at a simple average. It might look simple, it's not. Garbage in, garbage out. Look around your own table at your board. Clearly you need a few diverse voices as well, and then also start looking about where you have initiatives, because every single firm, even in the professional services, is different. Every single department is different, and you need to tackle things in different ways accordingly. So that's enough from me, Richard, and I'll happily send you those 5 questions and the 6-point plan, but I'm not saying it's easy. It isn't. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think, Fiona, you're going to probably have a lot more to contribute. So thank you so much for that. It was a real tour de force, I think, is the best way to describe it. Francesca, let's have your thoughts.
Oh, God, I love that. That was fantastic, Fiona. Thank you so much. I was sitting here going, yes, 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 making those notes. Let me start there, because I've seen all of those initiatives. In fact, I've got a horrible feeling I've been involved in some of those, and you're so right. They just don't work. We do an annual survey. God, no, another survey, I'm afraid. And it is looking at, it just happens to look at gender only. It's not an inclusivity survey, it's a gender survey. And it's about women in boards. And over the last 15 years, we're reporting on those boards that give the data. We do a survey to get beyond the public data. This is really targeted at mid-market firms that don't publish this data. We do a survey to see how many, what's the male-female divide on boards. And over the last 15 years, the dial has crept up an epic 2%. Woohoo! And then globally, it runs around about 26, 27% on average. Individual countries do a lot better than that, and some individual countries do a huge amount worse. Interestingly, the countries that do really well are countries with very different cultures. Russia, awesome. That's because communism has made it a very different approach. Not advocating communism as a way to improve things, but I'm just saying it is fascinating, isn't it? And if you go to places like the Philippines, a very different divide at senior level. A lot of that was actually driven, well, this is what my Philippine CEO tells me, an awful lot of that was family-owned businesses, where it just ended up progressing to a female who then ran the business so much better than anybody else. It really changed the dial quite a few decades ago. But also they have an amazing infrastructure of extended family support to help people who are managing a plethora of different things, which may include childcare, but include a lot else as well. But oh my Lord, if we don't do something about this before I fall off my perch, I'll think that we've not left the right legacy. And two things that really struck me from what you said is we're really good at initiatives. I've seen so many. I've seen great names, brilliant marketing, and they haven't done a single thing. It is slow. It needs to be entrenched. If you don't bring an equal number of men and women into your organisation, for example, you can't expect to have a chance of increasing your leadership pool in the future. And when you come to that much broader inclusivity point, there's just such a long way to go. The things I have seen that have really helped in some regard, and I appreciate they are small pebbles into a big pool. Reverse mentoring, I think, has been quite interesting for people to actually be mentored by somebody who's go, this is what it's like for me sitting here. This is what it feels like, looks like, sounds like, tastes like in terms of how my life is working. And I think that's had a massive impact on those I've seen who've been through that.
Reverse mentoring is very different from cross mentoring because it's the age gap that you're bringing.
Well, I know our UK CEO has been reverse mentored by an amazing individual called Izzy Sherlock, and they are extraordinary in so many ways. And that for him was absolutely life-changing, both in terms of his approach to D&I, but also really going, I actually begin to understand it. And I thought him as the CEO doing it, and then being such a passionate advocate. So the UK partner meeting, which of course was virtual, as it would be, the one they've just done, they have 3 massive sessions. A whole session was given over to D&I to showcase some of the ways that it could become real. And although, again, that's just a virtual event, but that commitment on time, I think you do have to go there. But I also love your point about the fact you have to pick it off like eating an elephant. There's lots of pieces to do. And just because you can make your board look visually as though you're massively into D&I, usually by cramming it with female Neds, that seems to be the way to do it these days. That's not the way to drive D&I, is it? There's some amazing Neds out there, but you've got to have operational people who share that diversity. And the second thing that really struck me is that you sometimes have to go back to go forward, because you're right. I run quite a lot of diverse teams, and they're challenging, and they're good because they're challenging, but that doesn't make it easy. It makes it good, but it doesn't make it easy. So I'm just great, Fiona. I loved everything that you said there. So I'm going to shut up, Richard, because I know you're going to want to bring Jeremy in, but I'm hoping you're going to get lots and lots of questions on this, because it is perhaps the biggest change and shift we can make in professional service firms if we get this right.
Yeah, do use the Q&A, guys. Absolutely. We've got lots of people on the call, and it would be lovely to get thoughts as well. Jeremy, for those who don't know Jeremy, he's the managing partner of Hayes McIntyre, which is a mid-sized single office accountancy firm. And he's been on the show, I think, probably about 15 times. So we've all got to know him quite well. We haven't really focused on diversity quite to this extent. So what are your thoughts on hearing what you've been hearing? And do pick up Alistair's points about property as well, because I think your experience there is interesting too.
Sure, thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is keeping well. Blimey, hard hitting this morning. The one point that Fiona made, which made me squirm in my seat, they don't know what they are doing. There's plenty of mornings that I wake up as managing partner of Hayes McIntyre and think I don't know what I'm doing. But by one way or another, we managed to get through and solve most issues. I guess the main thing around that is listening to people, and Richard always mentions that at the start of each session, that listening is a great thing, but ultimately you have to listen to people, but ultimately I guess the management team has to make the decision. Certainly diversity and inclusion, ESG, is becoming more and more prominent on our agenda. We're currently looking at our 3-year strategic plan, and that will feature heavily in that. And I actually did a presentation. I don't do many presentations to prospective clients these days, but I did one earlier this week, and I was grilled. I was really grilled on our diversity, our sustainability approach, etc. No grilling on audit or tax or the skills that we bring to the table, but we were really grilled. Unfortunately, because of the potential client, we sort of thought these questions might come, but even so, it was, I have to say, it was a little bit uncomfortable, and I didn't quite have all the answers in retrospect I wished I had. And the comment to me on that, the comment from the prospective client actually was, you need to be pursuing these very aggressively to even get halfway to where you need to be in the next few years. And that's certainly struck a chord with me. Yeah, slightly embarrassed to admit in front of Fiona, yes, we've done the unconscious bias training. Yes, we have staff forums, all those good things that we thought we were doing. And Fiona's put me right on those this morning. So we'll go back and have a look at that. But yeah, very much on our agenda. It is being led by a member of our management team. I think as a firm, we do, I hesitate to say quite well, but compared to the profession, I think as a whole, Hayes McIntyre is doing well. Absolutely, it's not good enough. You know, I not quite as long ago as Alistair, but I was the intake of 1987. And the mix of female and male joiners in the intake in that September was for the first time then more females than there were females. That's 33 years ago. I'm not sure that that's changed significantly. Maybe it doesn't need to. I think what's more important to us at the moment as a profession and as a business is looking at other diversities rather than just the gender split. I think as a business, as a profession, we've probably been reasonably okay in terms of gender, but it's other diversities that are a challenge. Quickly on property, I agree with you, Richard. It should be a great topic for Q&A this morning, so I don't want to take up too much time. Yeah, agree with Alistair. I think the office culture, maintaining that is a challenge at the moment, and recognising the needs of those in their early careers, really important to us. Space is going to change the way in which we use space. Hayes McIntyre as a business has had to move office 3 times within the last, let's call it 8 years, because we've simply run out of space. Suddenly we look at an environment now where we can actually grow our business quite a bit without needing any more space, but we need to change the way in which we use that space. Going to the office, we think, will be a different experience, and it needs to be a different environment to cope with that for our people. So I'm going to shut up and hope that there's lots of questions for Fiona.
Let's go back to Alistair, if I may, because I mean, I'm not just going to grill you on your D&I policy, Alistair, because that's not fair. But to what I mean, there is a view that in the property world, this is perhaps not as high a priority as in other sectors. But generally, picking up the points that Jeremy was making on the property, as I said, a single office firm, but completely changing the structure. I mean, what impact will that have on the property industry if a lot of offices do move into a very different use pattern?
Well, I think the one thing real estate has shown over the years is that actually it's quite adaptable when it comes to changing the purpose of buildings. It's just a very painful process to go through if people lose value as a consequence. You know, retail is collapsing in value. Having spent 30 years being the golden child of the real estate sector, it is being remodeled. The smart people are buying obsolete or increasingly obsolete shopping centres and making them different. So they are multi-purpose, well-located sites for a modest amount of leisure, retail, hotels. When markets come back to normality, they will definitely have a place to pay. And I think the same will happen to office buildings. I don't believe we're going to see swathes of London that's going to become redundant, if that's the core question. Who knows? I could be wrong, but there's no evidence to suggest at the moment. You know, don't forget London and the UK, if I may say, because the regional cities were the same, were going through a real renaissance of popularity. And it breaks my heart to see lockdowns absolutely creating mayhem within all of our cities. And the first thing we've got to do is do our part to get cities functioning again, because that's where life is, let's be honest. I don't want to undermine the rest of it, but we have had 30 years of centralisation into cities. I don't think that's going to go into reverse, because there is not the infrastructure in the rural communities to accommodate it, because it has been such volume. We have got to get our cities working again, and that will mean people will return to the workplace. They will return to hotels in Manchester and Park Lane over time. The hotels may need to change their offering. They may become business communities. If you don't need to go to an office and you've given up on WeWork, why not have your meeting more and more in hotels? I think it's going to be a really exciting time. Could I just thank Fiona, because perhaps like Richard, but I'm sure, Jeremy, but I'm sure Jeremy's way ahead of us. We've done all the things that Fiona suggested we shouldn't have done, but we've done it all with the very best of intentions and naively thought we were making some progress. But I'm now going to go back and check because I'm not sure. The one thing with diversity in real estate, which really does break my heart, we made up 4 equity partners 12 years ago, which was a big percentage of our equity at the time. And all of those 4 people were women. Very well qualified, obviously thoroughly deserving, and we didn't get a single mention about anything. It was business as usual for us. It wasn't regarded differently. Woefully, we've hardly got any more women in our equity now than we did have then. So something has gone wrong. But we have for a long time been recruiting a very diverse young group of people into real estate. The problem real estate has gone is just not Knight Frank. It's our clients as well as us. They don't stay in the industry. So we're doing something wrong, not them. We are doing something wrong. So we're spending all of our time and effort to work out how we are going to keep women in the middle of their careers into real estate, whereas at the moment they're leaving in droves, and that's not acceptable. And just to give us all some heart, we really focused this year on our graduates and our interns with an external consultant called Wiser, who have been unbelievable. And we set ourselves a target: 50% women, 50% from state school, 20% Bain, and we hit all the targets. Why? Because we set them. Now, I'm not saying that was to tick a box, because every single one of those people who I've met are at least as equally qualified when we didn't have those criteria in place, and actually are bringing a very rich seam of different breadth of thinking into the business at a very early stage. The only issue I struggle with, Fiona, which we'll take offline, and it may be other industries and other people, but I say, and our PR people go mad, I say this is the 15-year project. Well, we've got to make change this year. We've got to make change next year. I said, go on, okay, set me a target for next year and I'm going to fail. Set me a target for the year after and it's going to look pathetic. We are not going to change this in real estate. I can't speak for all the other. We are not going to change this in a meaningful way for 10 or 15 years, because we've got to get those. If we can nick a few people from British Land and CBRE, but that doesn't add to the diversity. It just moves it around. And God, the arguments I have here with our board about we've got to take a 10 or 15 year project. It's not going to happen overnight. We got to keep the people we're recruiting in the BAME arena, so that they are the executives of the business in 20 years' time. Sorry.
Fiona, I was just going to say, you're almost moving into your world of set your proxy metrics between now over the next 15 years is something that occurs to me, but please share.
Right, you cannot change this quickly, and you've got very loud voices within those minority networks who want to see activity, and therefore you're giving them activity. Jeremy talked about, pitching. I won't name the mid-cap stockbroker, but I was talking to a mid-cap stockbroker, and I was actually training, and I don't normally do training, but I'm on their advisory board, to their sales team. And I said, when you get asked the D&I question, you all need to be on the same page. You all need to not apologise for the fact that your board is 90% men, because it's a partnership. You can't tell people to go away straight away, and you need to explain you're actually in line with your industry, which is rubbish. So, and society also has something to play a part, because unconscious bias starts at 6, between 4 and 6. So you can't change everything, but understanding where you're going, setting targets. But I just want to make one other point. Giving people, trying not to fix the minorities. They don't need fixing. We talk to the minorities, men and women, about the boardroom, because they have less exposure to the boardroom. They haven't been brought up talking to boards, thinking of boards. They're not at the golf club, the sports club, the rugby club necessarily. They don't know all these board members across communities for a whole host of reasons. And talking to them about the boardroom, what goes on at Knight Frank's board? Do you even know? What do the committees do? Do you know who's on them? Do you know what they do? Why? Because if you don't have a vision of what they do, you don't aspire to being on it. And I think that's one thing that you can do. And when I'm speaking to D&I people, they would say, why would we want to tell our young staff about the boardroom? Like, what's the point of that? They think we're talking footsie boards. We're not. We're talking about the local arts centre and the career benefits of being on external boards, but it's aspirational. And that's where the influence thing matters. So you can give all of those messages, but that's proper content, lack of knowledge they have. and lack of access they have. You can do things like that. But having nice, people say, oh, we had a great initiative. People loved it. Do you know what? I like reading a magazine. So I like going on a conference and listening to lovely people, and I listen to fantastic people talk and go, wow, Carolyn McCall, ex-chief executive, wow, she's marvellous, but she's not you. So it's those types of things that you need to think about. But Jeremy, don't apologise for where you are. And Alistair, don't apologise for it taking 20 years, because it will. And you want to know, and Francesca picked it up, can the person who's head of career be the head of Knight Frank Global? If not, why not? And I don't care whether they're male or female. There's nothing gender specific about the boardroom.
Oh, I just love that. I'm gonna two things, if that's okay, Richard, to jump in on.
Please go.
Well, one is picking up around that pitch team piece, and I know I really feel, Jeremy, the same pain when you get asked those really difficult questions and you kind of go, oh, actually, not sure we've really answered all of these at all. And that honesty that you always show, Jeremy, I think is really telling. We had one moment where we were pitching not that long ago, and the client went, well, I appreciate you're on this journey, but I'm looking at your pitch team, doesn't look massively diverse to me. And we said, well, actually, we want to make sure the pitch team is the team delivering the work. Now, we don't want to have a pitch team that's just glorified to make it look like something that we're not. These are the people who'll be doing the job. And they're going, well, you need to start thinking about how you're broadening out the people you've got. And it was a really fair challenge. But the second thing I just want to pick up is there's some great questions in the Q&A, Richard, which I know you'll be looking at. And one, I just, they're really pitched at Fiona, but just want to comment on one of them, is the whole ECG sustainability agenda. Has that become, I think the gist of it is that become flavour of the month, and therefore that's now the one that boards get excited about, and has that pushed D&I down? And I think that absolutely speaks to the whole thing about initiatives. Things do get suddenly raised up and then drop like a stone when the next new toy's in town. And for D&I to work, it's got to be something that isn't a thing. It's the way that you do business, and I think it has to get into that track.
Yeah, I don't think D&I is quite at the same level in the boardroom as ESG, but I do know of 2 FTSE 100 companies, which I can't name, who have put D&I within their ESG committees. Because how many committees can a board have? Realistically, what's the time, what's the balance? I can see Alistair wants to come in here, so Alistair can say, but that it's actually really looking at it rather than saying, oh, we care.
Well, thank you, Benny. It wasn't to put ourselves on the same platform as the FTSE 100, but to say to get the guidance really is that we are weaving D&I into ESG, so it becomes a pivotal part of our ESG approach. Otherwise, we were going to have another raft of groupings, and they weren't going to be linked together. So within the S, I guess, of ESG, or the S and G, in truth, of ESG, we are sitting our D&I approach.
I think the other thing is within ESG is the community and where you work and the impact you're having. And if you look at the people who've got to the top of Fortune 500 boards as C-suite executives, they've all been on boards before the age of 28. Now, we're not talking FTSE here or startup entrepreneur Silicon Valley stuff. We're talking about the local rugby club. We're talking about the hospice. We're talking about the local charity. And by lending your employees into the community boards, actually is like taking a mini MBA, assuming they choose the right board, because I'll tell you what, there's some shockers out there. But you don't know what you know about leadership, HR, policies, GDPR, even if it's got nothing to do with your day job, until you get outside. And then you actually see what it's like to be floating at the top of your organisation way before you've got any chance. And Alistair talked about the turnover within property. There's more turnover when and the sales teams, you can't do anything about that if that's the nature of your business. But you can share that talent and those that get exposure to leadership, because I think there's a lot of turnover because people get frustrated because it's a very flat pyramid. There's lots of people at the bottom, very few movements up to the top to be head of the office or head of the division. Going on to community boards, you can get your career and leadership stripes. But if you're speaking to the wrong person, they'll just go, why would we want to do that? If I try and explain to Alistair and my board and Jeremy about training my people to go on boards, well, what's the point of that? That's influence and power, and a total lack of understanding of aspirations.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I think, unfortunately, this has been a fascinating discussion. I can't recall often having somebody coming along and sort of haranguing, if it's probably not quite the right word, but making her points very strongly about how important this topic is, and some of the other people on the call thinking, yeah, actually, maybe it is a point there I should go back and review. And then fantastic leadership from your side, if I may say so, Fiona. I've enjoyed having today's session. It's really sad that we're just 10 o'clock, so I've got to say goodbye to our amazing panel. Today's videos, 5 minutes, will be available next week on the management website. There's the link at the bottom. There are 67 of them in there. It's a really amazing resource. And we will be seeing Fiona and Alistair's contribution shortly. I haven't quite worked out how to put Francesca and Jeremy in. I think I'll have to do a special for them because there's so much content that it's quite hard to edit it down. But at the moment, unfortunately, they're not there, but everybody else is. So that's great. So do go and watch them. It's a free resource. You just have to go to the Management Partner Forum website, reach in your firm, and you're away. If you want to watch the full show, again, you can watch today's full show next week, and that's in the Management Library. And then only really means to say, I hope you found today valuable. Please encourage your peers to book. We're getting numbers are growing at the moment. Whether that's lockdown, I don't know, which is great. We're getting good contribution to the polls, and we've got a lovely, great session lined up for next week, next Friday as well, which I won't sort of tell you too much about now. But just wanted to say again, thank you very much to Jeremy, to Fiona, to Francesca, and to Alistair for taking some time out. That's the most valuable resource, and sharing their thoughts with us today. And I thought a really active session that's going to certainly take a lot of people are going to go away and think about, am I doing the right thing? And if you've achieved that, Fiona, to this audience, I really appreciate your contribution. Thank you very much.